This episode is brought to you by Netflix. So Netflix is basically Santa this year. 2 NFL games on Christmas Day, streaming live. At 1 p.m. Eastern, it's Cowboys, Commanders. Then at 4:30, you've got Lions, Vikings. Midwest football, playoff stakes, and probably some snow. Watching holiday football is a tradition the whole family can enjoy. Open some gifts, grab some food, settle in, and watch NFL Live on Netflix this Christmas Day.
Say hello to the all-new Alexa Plus and see how Alexa can do so much more for you. Need tickets to see your favorite artist? Craving your comfort restaurant? Just sit back, relax, and talk naturally. Alexa's on it. It learns your style, anticipates what's next, and makes it happen across Echo, Fire TV, and more. Learn more at amazon.com/new Alexa.
Welcome back, True Crime Army. I am your host, Margot, and this is Military Murder, a show where I discuss cases involving military members and veterans, all with one goal in mind, to remind you to remain vigilant always. And today, I'm going to talk about something I have never talked about before, and that is human trafficking. It's a taboo subject and something that people only whisper about. But human trafficking is one of the darkest crimes hiding in plain sight across America. And while most people think of human trafficking as strangers being snatched off of the street, the reality is much more complex and it's far more personal. The thing about this crime is that human traffickers target the vulnerable, people struggling financially, emotionally, and people who have trauma. That means our veteran and military community, those who return home carrying invisible wounds, are at a heightened risk. And today's story is about one of those veterans, a young military soldier who deployed to Afghanistan, survived trauma both overseas and at home, and fought to rebuild her life. But years later, in a moment of vulnerability, she crossed paths with a predator who saw her not as a human being, not as a mother, a daughter, or a veteran, but he saw her as someone that he could exploit. Join me today as I tell you the story of Caleigha Zangari, her life, her struggles, the dangers that she faced as a human trafficking survivor, and the brutal crime that stole her future. Now, let's dig in.
Military murder is an independent project and is not endorsed by the Department of Defense or any military component. The views expressed are those of the host. The content of this podcast is not meant to be legal or medical advice. Warning, this episode contains graphic details of murder and is not suitable for young listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
It's a warm Thursday night on August 15th, 2024 in Dallas, Texas. Surveillance camera in a parking lot near Harry Hines Boulevard, which is a stretch that locals ominously called the Blade for its reputation as a prostitution hotspot. Well, this surveillance camera captures a young woman walking toward a semi-truck, and there's other young women also walking around. The woman is 25-year-old Caleigha Zangari, an Army veteran from California who came to Dallas, Texas looking for a fresh start. In the grainy video, you can see her climb into the cab of the dark semi at 9:27 p.m. That night is the last time that anyone saw Caleigha alive. The semi-truck drove off into the darkness with Caleigha inside. Hours go by and then days with no word from Caleigha. Family and friends grow concerned as calls to Caleigha's phone go unanswered. Something is wrong, terribly wrong. A week later, on August 23, 2024, investigators make a gruesome discovery over 120 miles away in the wooded area of a rural highway in East Texas. There, in the brush near a desolate road outside the small town of Pittsburgh, Texas, authorities find a decomposing body. It's Caleigha. A black plastic garbage bag has been tied over her head, and her body has been callously dumped like trash in the woods. At this point, what was first a missing persons case has become a murder investigation. But who killed Caleigha Zangari and why? Now, to answer that, we have to understand who Caleigha was and how she found herself in such a dangerous situation. Who was Caleigha Zangari? Caleigha Zangari grew up in San Diego, California with a loving family. Right after high school, Caleigha joined the Army, and while she was in the Army, she deployed to Afghanistan. I don't know what job she held, but like many veterans, coming home was its own battle. Caleigha carried invisible wounds, trauma from both her military service and a sexual assault. Now, it's unclear if the assault occurred in the service, but nonetheless, it was something that Caleigha lived with. These experiences haunted Caleigha, and it made adjusting to civilian life incredibly challenging. By her early 20s, Caleigha was also a young mother. She had a young son who she adored. Caleigha wasn't just a veteran, she was a daughter, a sister, an aunt, and a devoted mom to a little boy. Everyone who knew Caleigha said that she was a light in the lives of everyone around her, the type of person who could make you smile and who deeply cared for the people she loved. And the thing about Caleigha is that she tried to rebuild her life after the army, but it wasn't easy because of her mental health struggles. She came home with PTSD and emotional scars as well as some other issues, and she struggled financially as a single mom. She was trying to stay afloat and she was trying to take care of her kid. And it was during this vulnerable period that Caleigha met a man who would change her life, and not for the better. Caleigha was lured into a relationship with a man who turned out to be a sex trafficker. We don't know all the details of that relationship, whether this man posed as a caring boyfriend at first or promised her some form of financial stability. But what we do know is that he exploited Caleigha's vulnerability. He controlled and coerced her into the commercial sex trade, essentially trafficking her. Caleigha became trapped in this cycle of abuse and exploitation, and she was likely feeling that she had no way out. But at some point, miraculously, Caleigha broke free from the man's grasp and she started over again. She started working legitimate jobs and she fought to provide for herself and her son on her own. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say sex work is a legitimate job, but clearly she was being forced into it. But listen, even after freeing herself of the sex worker life, the trauma and financial hardships didn't magically disappear for Caleigha. And by the summer of 2024, she felt this immense pressure. Bills were piling up and she was determined to create a stable life for her child. So in early August of 2024, Caleigha made a desperate decision. She would return to sex work, and this time she was going to do it on her own terms, basically to quickly earn some money. Her plan was to go to Dallas, Texas, where apparently the demand was high. She wanted to make enough money to get back on her feet, and then she was going to leave that life behind for good. Dallas, after all, is a major city, and sadly, it's a known hotspot for commercial sex and trafficking activity. In fact, I did discover during my research that every month, an estimated 85,000 online sex ads are posted in the Dallas-Fort Worth area alone. And behind each of those ads is a woman with a story, just like Caleigha. So around the second week of August, Caleigha traveled from California to Dallas in search of financial stability. That's how one account later put it. Caleigha set up online ads for escort services, and she posted them in different areas as she traveled east. She had ads posted in Tucson, Arizona from August 7th through the 8th. She had ads in Houston from the 9th through the 10th. And she had ads in Dallas, Texas between August 9th and August 15th, hoping to book enough dates to make the trip all worthwhile. Mind you, she also took her son. We never know who she left her son with during this time, but I'll get back to that later. Eventually, Caleigha checked into a Dallas motel on West Northwest Highway on August 12th, and she was paid through the 17th when she was auto-checked out. Now, during this time frame, Caleigha worked around the Harry Hines Boulevard area, which is the Blade, where sex workers can often find clients on the street late at night just driving around. Clearly, this is risky, but Caleigha felt she didn't have any other options. Caleigha even had her own car with her, which gave her some form of autonomy to move around and meet clients wherever she wanted to. As the ads went up, Caleigha did get responses. One of them was from a truck driver named Naasson Hazzard. Hazzard was a 28-year-old married man. He was a long-haul truck driver from Austin, Texas. Now, on the surface, he was just another client reaching out for her services. Caleigha and Hazzard exchanged messages and phone calls, more than a dozen back-and-forth texts over a few days to negotiate a meeting. Hazzard arranged to see Caleigha on the night of August 15th. We don't know what price or what terms they agreed on, but the plan was set. Hazzard was going to meet Caleigha in the parking lot of a local business in Northwest Dallas. Caleigha thought this was going to be a routine job, right? She'd spend maybe an hour or two with the guy in his truck, earn some money, and be back in her own car before midnight. That night, Caleigha left all of her personal belongings in her parked vehicle. Then, just after 9:27 p.m., Caleigha stepped into Naasson Hazzard's tractor-trailer cab, and the two drove off. Caleigha did have her cell phone at the time, but this would be the last transaction that she would ever accept. What Caleigha thought was a straightforward arrangement turned out to be a nightmare. Not long after she got into Hazzard's truck, things went horribly wrong. We may never know exactly what transpired in those crucial first moments, but the evidence gives us a chilling outline. Instead of dropping Caleigha back off after their encounter, Hazzard kept her in the truck against her will, effectively kidnapping her. For about 17 minutes, his semi-truck remained parked in a lot with Caleigha inside. At 9:44 p.m. or so, the truck finally pulled out of the parking area and headed toward the highway. If anyone had seen that truck drive away, nothing would have seemed amiss, just a truck merging into nighttime traffic. But inside that truck cab was Caleigha, and she was in grave danger. Hazzard immediately drove east, leaving Dallas behind. Now, cell phone records later showed that as Hazzard left the city, Caleigha's phone was traveling side by side with him, pinging tower after tower. Investigators would later map the route. The truck headed north from the pickup spot, then east onto LBJ Freeway, which was Interstate 635 and beyond. Caleigha's phone pinged alongside Hazzard's phone for a while, moving in tandem out of Dallas. Then, suddenly, her phone went dark. The signal on Caleigha's phone stopped along the LBJ Freeway on the outskirts of Dallas. Now, what happened? Well, it appeared that Hazzard shut off Caleigha's phone, then tossed it out the window while he was on the highway. Investigators would later find Caleigha's cell phone shattered in pieces, tossed on the side of that very freeway that he was driving on. For the next 3 hours or so, Hazzard drove eastward into rural Texas. The truck eventually exited the highway near a remote area in Camp County, not far from the small town of Pittsburgh, Texas. And it was past midnight by the time that Hazzard reached an isolated spot off of Texas Highway 11. It's a place where there was nothing around but woods and quiet county roads. Now it's here that Hazzard committed the final brutal act of violence. At some point during the night of August 15th, or maybe the early morning hours of August 16th, Hazzard killed Caleigha Zangari. Authorities did not immediately know how Caleigha died, but the condition in which her body was ultimately found spoke volumes. Caleigha was found with a black plastic bag over her head, her body dumped off the roadside among the trees, leaving her there alone in the dark. After dumping her body, Hazzard lingered in this area for about 37 minutes, but before he left the scene, he did something brazen. He pulled out his cell phone and he texted his boss. At 12:50 a.m. on August 16th, Hazzard messaged his employer saying he was calling out sick from work that next day. And the audacity of this phone call or this text message or whatever it is stunning, because as he was calling into work sick, Caleigha lay dead or dying in the woods. And Hazzard was already arranging a day off, presumably so that he could take time to cover up his crime. After leaving the scene, Hazzard went on to complete a scheduled work delivery as if nothing had happened. The sun rose on August 16th with Caleigha's body still out there in the woods, and it was hidden from view. At this point, no one except Hazzard knew that Caleigha was dead. But Hazzard wasn't done with that wooded site quite yet. In a bizarre and chilling move, he returned to the dump site the very next day, and he brought his wife with him. How long they stayed there, we don't know. But after this, maybe quick visit or whatever, the two of them went to have dinner in the nearby town of Tyler, Texas. What was this man thinking? Did he fiend a work errand and casually include a stop near the body just to see if it had been discovered? And the thing about this case is that we don't know if Hazzard's wife had any idea what was really out there in those woods. But we do know that shortly after that trip, she would start to suspect something was very wrong. And eventually, they would find an online search on her phone of any crimes committed in the Pittsburgh area. But I'm going to leave that there because there was not too much said about that besides that simple little nugget. In the few days following Caleigha's murder, Naasson Hazzard took multiple steps to cover his tracks. He was not going to go down for this. He knew that he had to clean up any evidence that could tie him to Caleigha's disappearance and his truck. So first, he got a new cell phone. He also deleted his Google account and a Life 360 app, which is a location sharing service that he had on his cell phone. And what he was doing by getting rid of this evidence is he was trying to erase any location history and any digital breadcrumbs that could place him at the crime scenes. Now, let's talk about his truck. Hazzard went into full cleanup mode. He sanitized the cab of his semi with bleach from top to bottom. If there was any sign of Caleigha's DNA, blood, or fingerprints in that truck, Hazzard wanted them gone ASAP. However, in his rush to hide what he had done, Hazzard overlooked one crucial fact. In the modern world, it's incredibly hard not to leave a trace, and Caleigha's disappearance had not gone unnoticed. Maybe Hazzard thought that by picking a sex worker, he would be picking someone who nobody would be looking for. But Caleigha had a lot of loved ones who were searching for her. When Caleigha didn't return on the night of August 15th, maybe no one noticed right away. But when she failed to check in with anyone in those days after, alarm bells started ringing. You see, prior to heading to Texas from California, Caleigha had been living with her grandmother in California. And when Caleigha left her grandma's house the week of August 5th, Caleigha left telling her grandma that she was heading to Texas to visit the family of her child's father. So off she went, but communicated with her grandmother daily. But it just turned out that from August 14th through August 21st, Grandma was unable to reach Caleigha and she grew concerned. So that's when she reported Caleigha missing in California. Once that report was made, law enforcement got involved relatively quickly. And given the circumstances, the case was taken very seriously. Caleigha wasn't from Dallas, but her family knew that she was traveling in that direction. And Caleigha was a young woman with no reason to suddenly vanish. And she had been communicating with her family on a daily basis. And because they also reported that Caleigha had at some point been engaged in high-risk activities such as sex work far away from home, the North Texas Trafficking Task Force took this seriously. Now, the North Texas Trafficking Task Force is a multi-agency law enforcement group led by Homeland Security Investigations, and they picked up Caleigha's case immediately. They understood that they might have a possible abduction or a trafficking situation on their hands, and they didn't want to waste any time. In addition to talking to Grandma back in California, authorities also spoke to a close friend of Caleigha, and Caleigha had actually been sharing her physical location, like on her phone, with this friend for months. This friend had been in nearly daily communication with Caleigha, but that all stopped after August 15th. After Caleigha was reported missing, they got information about Caleigha's car, and investigators in Dallas soon found Caleigha's car in a tow yard in Dallas. They eventually found out where it had been towed from, and they went back to that location. But first, they checked the vehicle and found a lot of important belongings. In Caleigha's car, they found a backpack, some shoes, Caleigha's prescription drugs, bank cards, her driver's license, and even an electronic tablet. So it was clear that Caleigha wasn't leaving for good. She intended to return to her car wherever it had been towed. Once investigators learned where Caleigha's car had been towed from, they learned that it was towed on August 18th. And now, when they found that location, it gave authorities a starting point. They now knew the exact location where Caleigha was last seen, and they could work backwards and forward from there. From that parking lot on Northwest Dallas's Blade, investigators canvassed for witnesses and they pulled surveillance footage from nearby businesses. And that's when they struck gold. They found one camera that actually captured Caleigha on video getting into a semi-truck around 9:27 p.m. on August 15th. The video quality wasn't great, but it clearly showed Caleigha and the silhouette of a large, dark truck. That license plate was also legible. Now, investigators had a critical lead. They knew that she left with a truck driver, and once they looked up that license plate number and who that vehicle belonged to, they came up with a name. At the same time, digital clues were also emerging. With help from the U.S. Attorney's Office, investigators subpoenaed cell phone records, and they combed through her online activity. There, they discovered that Caleigha had been advertising as a sex worker online in the days before she vanished, which fit what they already suspected. Among her communications online, one exchange stood out to investigators. It was a series of messages with an unknown man to set up a meeting on August 15th. Now, those messages, there were more than a dozen of them, were traced back to a phone number, a number registered to a man named Naasson Hazzard. Suddenly, the pieces for this investigation were coming together. Investigators had a name and a face to match the truck. They pulled Hazzard's information and they found that he was a 28-year-old truck driver from Austin, Texas. And not only that, but he had a scheduled truck route that could place him in Dallas the night that Caleigha was last seen. Investigators continued to dig, and that's when they found that the day after meeting with Caleigha, Hazzard called off from work. That is, of course, an interesting fact, and now they suspected this guy even more. But listen, suspecting Hazzard and proving what happened were two different challenges. Agents needed evidence to locate Caleigha and tie Hazzard to a crime. That's where modern technology truly became the hero of this entire story. By analyzing cell tower data, investigators tracked the path of Hazzard's phone on the night of August 15th into the early morning hours of the 16th, and it matched the route east out of Dallas that Caleigha's phone had taken until it was cut off. Essentially, they found the digital breadcrumbs. The data trail led them along Interstate 30 and then up into the rural roads near Pittsburgh, Texas. Armed with this information, federal agents and local police launched a search along Hazzard's suspected route. On August 23, 2024, 8 days after Caleigha disappeared, their efforts paid off. On that day, they found Caleigha's shattered phone on the roadside off of LBJ Freeway in Dallas, confirming that her device had indeed been tossed from Hazzard's truck early on. And then authorities searched an area where Hazzard's phone showed that he had stopped for 37 minutes after getting off of the highway. A witness in that area was questioned, and they did recall seeing a truck out in that wooded area. And when authorities searched that area where this witness was like, yeah, it was around like that area over there, and they pointed, well, heartbreakingly, that is exactly where they found Caleigha's body in those woods off of Highway 11, just as the cell data predicted. Caleigha was identified and the scene was processed. Even though Caleigha's remains were in a state of decomposition after a very hot Texas week outdoors, remember, it's August in Texas, well, investigators identified Caleigha through a tattoo, in addition to the fact that the clothing that the body was wearing matched the clothing seen in the surveillance footage. In addition to her decomposing body, authorities could tell that her head had been wrapped in a plastic bag. With the discovery of her remains, Caleigha's disappearance was now undeniably a homicide case. With the recovery of Caleigha's body, authorities moved swiftly to secure an arrest warrant for Naasson Hazzard. The evidence against him was already compelling. They had the surveillance video, the ad message trail connecting him to Caleigha, the cell phone pings following his truck's journey along with her cell phone, his abrupt sick day after Caleigha went missing, and his discarded phone and cleanup efforts indicating a consciousness of guilt. Within hours of finding Caleigha, federal agents arrested Hazzard and charged him via a federal criminal complaint. Given the interstate aspects of this case and the nature of the crime, kidnapping resulting in death, the case fell under federal jurisdiction. Now, I will say that to this day, Hazzard's defense attorneys are arguing that this is not a federal case because he never left the state. He picked her up in Dallas, dumped her body in Dallas, and never left the state. But the feds did take the case, and it was prosecuted in that jurisdiction. Upon his arrest, Hazzard did make a statement. He admitted that Caleigha was in his truck on the night of August 15th, but he declined to provide any more information about Caleigha or her whereabouts. A federal grand jury did indict Hazzard in August of 2024 on the single charge of kidnapping resulting in death, which, by the way, carries a mandatory life sentence under U.S. law. This charge, which was basically kidnapping, meant that prosecutors didn't even have to prove premeditated murder. They only had to prove that Hazzard willfully abducted Caleigha and that she died as a result of that abduction. The penalty, however, is as severe as a murder charge. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered even more damning evidence of Hazzard's guilt. But perhaps most incriminating of all was Hazzard's Google search history. When agents combed through his online accounts, they found that after the murder, Hazzard had Googled, quote, "How many years for first, second, and third degree murders," end quote. Now, just imagine this. Even as he claimed innocence later, this man was literally researching prison sentences for murder. That search occurred in the immediate aftermath of Caleigha's death, showing that he knew she was dead and was contemplating the consequences if he was caught. All of these pieces taken together formed a clear picture. By the time Hazzard's trial date arrived, the authorities had built an airtight case that would be very hard for any defense attorney to refute. But then again, those could be famous last words. In January of 2025, roughly 5 months after Caleigha's murder, Naasson Hazzard's trial began in a Dallas federal courtroom. The charge, kidnapping resulting in death. The trial lasted a little over a week, during which the jury was presented with the full, harrowing story of what happened to Caleigha Zangari. Here is where prosecutors laid out the timeline step by step, backed by extensive evidence. They showed the surveillance video of Caleigha stepping into Hazzard's truck on August 15th. They presented records of the text messages and online exchanges between Hazzard and Caleigha to establish how he lured her into that meeting. Jurors saw maps and they heard testimony about the cell phone pings and tracking data, illustrating how Hazzard's phone and Caleigha's phone traveled together out of Dallas and along the route to the woods where she was ultimately found. Investigators testified about finding Caleigha's phone on the highway and all the belongings she had in her abandoned car, each detail reinforcing that Caleigha didn't just run off, she was taken. The medical examiner later testified that he ruled her cause of death as homicidal violence. But because of how decomposed her body was and the plastic bag over her head, he said that he couldn't rule out suffocation or smothering. And because of this, he couldn't say exactly how Caleigha was killed. Toxicology reports did come back essentially clean. There were no drugs and only trace alcohol that he said was due to decomposition and not from drinking alcohol. Crucially, the prosecution not only had digital breadcrumbs, but they had physical breadcrumbs of Hazzard's guilt. They had the phone that he tossed, the bleach that he used, and the internet searches. When the jury heard that Hazzard literally Googled how many years he'd get for murder, I can only imagine a ripple going through the courtroom. It's such a blatant indicator of a guilty mind. Well, the defense, on the other hand, they didn't have much to work with. And on February 5th, 2025, a jury found Naasson Hazzard guilty on the charge of kidnapping resulting in death. It was a unanimous verdict. The jury saw through any doubt and held Hazzard responsible for Caleigha's murder. This conviction automatically carried a mandatory life sentence in federal prison. There was no need for a separate debate on death penalty or, a sentencing phase, because by law, life behind bars was the only outcome for a conviction on that charge. Hazzard's formal sentencing hearing, though, was scheduled for a few months later in June of 2025. At that hearing on June 12, 2025, Caleigha's family finally had a chance to address the court, and they also had a chance to address the man who had destroyed their world. Several of Caleigha's family members spoke, giving victim impact statements that were as powerful as they were heart-wrenching. Caleigha's father, her little brother, and even her sister, they all shared with the judge how their lives had been shattered by losing Caleigha. One of her brothers stood up and directly spoke about the true cost of Hazzard's actions. He said, quote, "Your Honor, Naasson didn't just take a life. He destroyed futures. He created a ripple effect of suffering that reaches further than he could ever understand. I ask you, please don't see my sister as just a name in a case file. She was a daughter, a sister, a mother, a light in the lives of everyone who knew her. Her life mattered, and her death must mean something," end quote. Those words, they hung in the courtroom air. Even for those of us just hearing them now, they are incredibly moving. Caleigha's life mattered, and her death must mean something. It's a plea not to let Caleigha become just another statistic, another forgotten victim. Her brother was urging the system to ensure that something positive, some change or some sort of awareness could come from Caleigha's tragedy. And the thing about Caleigha is that we can't forget about her son. The judge heard that just days before Caleigha's body was discovered, Caleigha's family was reunited and they took custody of her son. Because at the end of the day, Caleigha was working to rebuild stability for her family and her son. When it was Naasson Hazzard's turn to speak, he surprisingly took the opportunity to talk at length. For over an hour, Hazzard stood there and insisted that he was innocent. He didn't kill Caleigha. He rambled on, trying to explain away the evidence or proclaim his innocence. But Judge Sam Lindsay, who presided over the case, was unmoved. The judge patiently listened, but ultimately told Hazzard, "Too bad, too sad. Your statement does not merit any reconsideration of this case. There would be no new trial, no leniency. The evidence spoke louder than Hazzard's self-serving speech. In the end, the judge formally handed down the only sentence possible, life in prison. Naasson Hazzard, 28 years old, will spend the rest of his natural life behind bars, with no possibility of parole in the federal system. Justice, at least in the legal sense, was served. But of course, he does have appeals. As Hazzard was led out of the courtroom, destined for a federal penitentiary, Caleigha's family were left with both relief and an immense grief. Outside the courtroom, some of them shared thoughts. Caleigha's mother wrote in a statement that Caleigha should still be here and she should have lived a long and happy life. And it's painfully true. By this time, Caleigha would have been 26, maybe 27 years old, likely watching her little boy grow, pursuing her dreams, and healing from her past. Instead, her life was brutally cut short. After the verdict and the sentence, investigators also reflected on the case. Jason Stewart, who is a supervisor with HSI's North Texas Trafficking Task Force, said that this case highlights the true dangers of trafficking and what those victims endure every single day. He pointed out that trafficking is on the rise in Texas, but so is law enforcement's resolve to fight it. In fact, since around 2018, that same North Texas task force has conducted over 75 federal human trafficking prosecutions, resulting in more than 900 total years of prison time and 18 sentences handed down to traffickers. Naasson Hazzard is now counted among those life sentences. He said, quote, "I hope this sentence sends a message that this type of behavior will not be tolerated and that our victims are human beings. They have dignity and they have life," end quote. Perhaps in this case, though, the most important perspective came from people like Amanda Pettit. Amanda Pettit is the founder of Rescue Hill, which is a nonprofit that had been following Caleigha's story closely. Rescue Hill works with trafficking survivors in the Dallas area, and Pettit had been deeply affected by what happened to Caleigha. She lamented that Caleigha didn't have an advocate by her side when she needed it most. If she had, Pettit said, she might still be alive. In media interviews, Pettit emphasized that women like Caleigha are often treated by society as disposable, when in reality, these women are not disposable. They are human beings. She noted that violence against trafficking victims is tragically common. Quote, "Not once have I worked with a woman who'd said she hadn't been beaten," end quote. Caleigha's case stands as a stark example of that brutal reality. She survived combat in a war zone, survived being trafficked by a predatory boyfriend, survived sexual assault, only to lose her life at 25 to yet another predator here at home. It's a story that is both enraging and heartbreaking. But as her brother said, Caleigha must mean something. It's up to all of us to find meaning by shining a light on the dark world of human trafficking and by protecting others from the fate that befell Caleigha. Caleigha Zangari's story is her own, but it's not an isolated case. What happened to her is part of a larger pattern of exploitation and violence that's happening all over the United States, often in the background of everyday life. Behind so many online ads and street corners are people who are carrying trauma, debt, addiction, abuse, and people who get targeted because of those vulnerabilities. Most trafficking victims are women and girls, and a heartbreaking number are just kids. Traffickers look for exactly these kinds of pressure points that Caleigha was living with: trauma, financial struggle, trying to hold it together alone. They use lies, manipulation, and sometimes outright force to pull people into situations that are incredibly hard to escape. So, what do we actually do with that information? First, we can support the people doing this work every day. There are organizations across the country, like Rescue Hill in Dallas, that meet people where they are, offer a safe way out, and help with housing, counseling, legal help, and even job support. If you're able, you can donate, you can volunteer, or even just share their resources so more people know they exist in the first place. Second, we can all pay attention to the things that feel off. Someone who never seems to control their own ID or money. A person who's always being watched, coached, or spoken for. We can also look for visible injuries and fear. If you see something that looks like it could be trafficking, you can contact law enforcement or reach out to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. They're available 24/7, and you can reach them at 1-888-373-7888. That's 1-888-373-7888. And the thing about this is that when you call, you don't have to prove anything. They can help you sort out whether it's a red flag or what to do next. Finally, remember that people who leave these types of high-risk lifestyles, whether by choice or not, they're human beings first. People like Caleigha, she was a veteran, a mom, a daughter, someone who had already survived so much. Her family said that her life mattered and that her death has to mean something. One way we honor her is by refusing to write off people in the same position as she was in, and by doing what we can, whether it's big or small, to make it safer for them to get out. Caleigha should still be here today. She should be raising her son and building the future she deserves. We can't change what happened to her, but we can stay aware. We can speak up when something feels wrong, and we can support survivors and the people fighting for them. This is how we keep Caleigha's light from going out, and how we make sure that her story doesn't just end with a sentence in a courtroom. Thank you so much, True Crime Army, for listening to this episode. It is so important and it is so heavy just to talk about this case. And I heard about Caleigha's case when I was getting ready to do like a headlines episode this summer. I saw her case pop up, and the more I looked into it, I realized because it had come, full circle, we knew exactly what happened to the perpetrator. I wanted to bring you that full episode. I was able to get the full trial transcript to put this episode together for you, so you do have very accurate information here. I do want to give a shout out to everyone who continues to support this show. Remember, I can only do this show with your support. So just listening is perfectly fine. You can listen with ads. If you want to support the show even more, check out my Patreon at patreon.com/militarymurder, where for as little as $5 a month, you can listen to my entire back catalog completely ad-free, as well as get access to over 50 bonus episodes. So again, you can support me at patreon.com/militarymurder if you're interested in that. My sources for this case include not only the trial transcript, but reporting by CBS News, Fox 4 News, Dallas-Fort Worth News, as well as statistics from stepstohope.org and rescuehill.org. Military Murder is a Mama Margot production. The music was created by Ty-Ops. Until next time, remember, you never really know what someone is capable of, so remain vigilant always. You have a fabulous week, and I'll keep digging to bring you another military murder story next time.
Mama's working on her podcast. I don't want to.